Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So here we are Pilsen Alliance, and today we are here to talk about the Pilsen housing event, and we also have a guest. His name is Hernan Gomez Chavez. He's a visual artist from Pilsen, and we're gonna talk a little bit about what he does, and we're gonna let you know about the type of art that he creates, right? So I just have some questions for you. Um, Thank you for being here today.
Thanks.
And so, how long have you lived in Chicago?
So I've lived here about a year and a half. I'm originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico. My family's from Mexico, but most of my life I've spent in New Mexico in the Southwest.
Okay. And how did you hear about Pilsen Alliance first?
So I spoke to a couple of artists when I got here. I got in contact with a couple of individuals because I came to Chicago to do my master's in fine arts at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Okay.
And a lot of people put me in contact with different organizations that were doing work in the communities of Chicago. One of them being Centro Autonomo in Albany Park. And then when I moved into Pilsen, I spoke to a couple of artists who told me a good place to go to in order to get involved and to learn about the issues regarding displacement in this community is Pilsen Alliance. And sure enough, I went in and spoke to Byron, and I kept in contact with a lot of the people from Pilsen Alliance and continued and supported a lot of the stuff that they were doing, either by showing up to some of the actions that you guys were doing or trying to put you guys in contact with people from other organizations that I started to know as well.
Okay. So, as you guys know, Pilsen Alliance is a social justice organization. It's nonprofit, and if you wanna visit us, you can visit us at 1744 West 18th Street, Chicago, Illinois 60608. You can visit us at our Facebook page as well. We also have a lot of stuff going on and around the community, and we work for affordable housing. We work for education in the schools around Pilsen, and we also work with environmental issues and all the good stuff. And so I have another question for you. What is the type of art that you do?
So I'm a metal sculptor. I do a lot of steel work, but around the time I was planning on moving to Chicago, I decided to do more socially engaged work that actually did something based on like my own values, because some of the work that I had done before didn't do that. So I started to use sort of billboards to really like go out into the community and like have messages that people could look at that addressed displacement, because the city that I come from is very segregated based along like class and race, and I thought it very important to use art as a tool to sort of show what was going on in my hometown. When I came to Chicago, it became very apparent that the history of displacement back home was something completely different than what's been going on here in Chicago. So I started reaching out to like professors from UIC and organizations like Pilsen Alliance to learn more about what was going on here, and to do work that kind of spoke to that. And it's very tricky because, like I said, I've only been here for a year and a half, so I'm trying to be very sensitive to speaking about these issues. And the work that I'm doing now is about addressing displacement by allowing people from the neighborhood to write down exactly what that means to them. So a lot of the work that I'm doing now is publicly engaging, and it's performative and asks for people out in the streets to respond to sort of a prompt or a question that I'm giving them. And what they're doing is sort of responding by writing something down.
So this is the piece of art that you've been walking around the community, different churches, different events in Pilsen, which is like a kind of like a participatory public art project, correct?
Yeah.
And what is the goal that you are trying to achieve with this piece of art?
Okay, so yeah, I can speak a little bit more about the piece that I made. So, being here for the time that I have, it became very, complicated for me to start speaking on behalf of issues that I honestly didn't have the breadth of experience or knowledge to speak about because, for one, I have not really been here for a long time, so I don't feel like I have a right to speak on behalf of the people, the gente that's already here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was advised by a professor from the School of the Art Institute to start reconsidering the kind of work that I was doing in a way that addressed not the word community, but sort of digging deeper into like who's living right next door to you so you can actually understand the neighborhood you're living in. So I created this movable white picket fence that has two prompts on it in Spanish and English, and it's one of them says "¿Quién es mi vecino?", which is the Spanish equivalent of "Who is my neighbor?"
Who's my neighbor? Mm-hmm.
And it's a way to go out into the Pilsen neighborhood and ask people to sort of engage with the work. And I'm asking the people to like be as honest as possible. Like, who is your neighbor really? How much has this neighborhood changed since you've been here? And I'm trying to get different perspectives because I think that in order to have a true dialogue based around what's going on right now, not just in Pilsen, but around like Chicago or even like other cities that are undergoing changes due to gentrification, it's necessary to see these different perspectives played out in an honest way that can allow for people to talk them through. Because it's really sad to have people like tell me, it's like, it's very difficult for me to stay here. I can no longer afford to live in this place anymore. And then you get people from the other side saying that they see these things as a positive. So where does that conversation really start to like get into the middle of like understanding that everybody really has a right to live somewhere, but it's not okay to like push somebody out from where they're living now.
Yes, and I think those type of conversations are very important in places like Pilsen, where there's a lot of polarized opinions.
Yeah.
Correct. So I feel like the type of art that you do, it's kind of like bringing people together.
Yeah.
And creating that common place, right? And how did the idea of your piece of art came along?
So again, that conversation I had with my instructor about, what does it really mean to be a neighbor to somebody in order to address like being a good neighbor. I thought to myself, what's a visual tool that I can use to address that? Okay. So I decided about using the white picket fence at that point. And then after actually speaking to like longtime artists here in Pilsen as well, and telling them my idea, one of them mentioned that I should bring the piece to St. Pius. Then I spoke to one of the priests there, and I had a very deep conversation about the changes going on, and he told me he really liked the idea because he's seen a large percentage of the people who have been going to the church displaced, yet they still come to St. Pius because they see it as a home for them. And he's the one who actually pushed me to like take this out into the streets and use it as a research tool to address some of the things that have been going on in this neighborhood, and to not just research but also support the same people that are being directly affected by it. And I mean, it's an evolving work, and it's kind of been that way since I started making this piece, but every time I take it out, it becomes something different. There's a performative act, and like the conversations sort of make it what it is. And that's sort of a way to kind of research on its own right and allow for people to engage and not be so put off by discussing the changes that are going on, because it allows for different perspectives to kind of go into it and stand side by side and show that there's a commonality. Like, everybody that's writing down is somebody that understands that there's definitely a change that's happened here.
Okay. What have you learned about gentrification through having people participating in that piece?
I've learned that not everybody sees it the same way. Even though, like, just learning from the Pilsen Alliance and like people like Professor Betancourt about some of the changes that have happened, like over 10,000 people being displaced from this neighborhood alone, some people think it tends to be safer because they see the changes with like commercial businesses coming in and less gang activity, and other people don't see it that way. They see that a lot of the people who were living right next door to them and who were like a family and were like a tight-knit community are no longer there anymore. So what I'm learning is that different people see it differently based on what their stake in the community is.
Okay.
So that's where it gets kind of tricky in trying to like address how the dialogue is going to push forward.
Right.
So that's something that I still think needs to be hashed out a little more in terms of how that can happen, so it doesn't just close itself off, but become something that really addresses the fact that people deserve to like have a place to live.
So do you think that art could be a way to kind of create consciousness about what is happening around Pilsen?
Yeah, to a certain extent, because I've also gotten really and I really like these responses. A lot of older like Hispanic men mostly, they it's happened about 2 or 3 times. They look at the piece and I tell them what it's about. It's about addressing the changes that have happened here, and they've all said the same thing, these 3 people, and it was in different places. This should have been done 5 or 10 years ago, because they've seen the change happen within that same time period, because they've seen like those drastic changes happen. So I mean, I feel like it can sort of address what's going on, but ultimately it's kind of like shining a light that something needs to happen, and I mean everybody's response is going to be different. Exactly. So that's something that I can't answer. It's still sort of being developed as the work is being done, and I as an artist don't feel like it's my right to sort of answer these questions. It's more organizations like Pilsen Alliance that have been here for a long time and actually do work for the community that can say something about that.
Yeah. That's great. So how are you planning to apply the knowledge that you are learning through this work, and how are you planning to apply it to your art in the future?
Yeah. I mean, there's a difference in like the ways that this can be applied in different areas. The reason why a piece like this works so well is because of the density within Chicago. If I take it out into the streets, there's always going to be foot traffic, especially here in Pilsen, and I'm being very methodic about where and when I take it out. Again, going back to some of the conversations I've had with people like the priest from St. Pius, or some of the artists that I've spoken to about how I can make this into work that really allows for the messages to speak on their own, instead of me just like going out there and telling people what to write. So it becomes a platform for people to engage with art, and that's something that I think is very important, whereas a lot of the art is just like put out there and it's kind of like this is what it is now, and you can kind of take it in, and it's based on like cultural ideas of what art's supposed to be. But this, on the other hand, is creating art through social interaction, and I think that's very important, and I want to kind of keep applying that to some extent, while still using some of older aesthetic values that I've had as well in my work.
Okay. So you also have participated with CAPA, which is a council of artists that are also part of Pilsen Alliance, and you participated with other artists such as Alfonso Piloto Nieves. And how was that experience for you? And what did you learn about working with other artists and to creating art but making it more like into action?
I felt that that was a necessity, considering that I was so new to Pilsen at that point, that it was something that I needed to do in order to give back and to learn about the kinds of issues that the people here in Pilsen cared about, and the images and the types of works that really kind of matter to the community. And that happened around May Day, correct?
Yes,
yeah,
May Day.
Yeah.
And have you find any type of issues or any type of messages about immigration and the work that you are doing, like in the public piece that you are doing?
Yeah, I have. There have been a couple of people that have written messages about DACA. And somebody also wrote down that they miss what Pilsen used to be, and that the same like Mexican rocker friends he used to have no longer live here because they couldn't afford to stay in Chicago, so they had to go back to Mexico.
Okay. So if you if you have any questions, you can call us at 312-738-1060. And if you need any information about housing and education issues, you can visit us in our office, which is 1744 West 18th Street, Chicago, Illinois, 60608. You can also visit our Pilsen Alliance Facebook page. Let me see what else. So, what did you see through your art? Through this piece that you have walking around the neighborhood, what did you see that is common between the people, and what is common that something that it's like a similar an opinion towards gentrification?
I wouldn't say there's a common opinion on gentrification. I think the commonality is that a lot of people, regardless of whether they're like quote unquote gentrifiers or people that are Pilsen natives, they have a really like deep affection for this neighborhood. So that's pretty much like, even if they're just passing by, because another thing that I did is I went to areas where like CTA public transport was, and I could get people that were just passing through the neighborhood to write messages as well to address the changes here in Pilsen through their perspective, even though they don't necessarily live here. And there's definitely a lot of love for Pilsen, and that's something that became very, very common throughout.
Through the whole experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Is there any other like points or experiences that you would like to share about yourself or about the type of art that you will be doing or will be doing in the future, or something that you can tell our audience that they can do in order to like help around the community?
Well, one thing that I can say is that many of us, including myself, are very wary at the beginning to actually get to know our neighbors, and that's I think that's one place where you can start to actually get to know the people that live right next door to you, because obviously there's a lot of drastic changes going on around different neighborhoods in Chicago, and it's very difficult to actually meet the people you're living right next to. So it's good to actually know the history of your neighbors, and kind of through this piece I I kind of parsed out a little bit about what that meant for different people, and I think it was very important to do so. One thing to do would be to see some of the work that's already being done and support that. And I really do feel like the Pilsen Alliance has done a lot of great work, and they're still doing that to protect some of what's still very valuable and important to the remaining Hispanic community in Pilsen. So supporting some of the organizations that are in the community already trying to defend the rights of people is very important to do. So reaching out and supporting in whatever way you can. And I'm very grateful for the fact that the Pilsen Alliance has been very supportive on some of the works that I've done before. And if it wasn't for them, this piece wouldn't have happened either.
Yeah, we would also like to thank you so much for your help and for everything that you're doing for the community. And one more thing. So you were there when the Casaslan, when they covered the murals for the Casaslan. As an artist, what was your thinking about that?
That's a very difficult question because I mean there's very varied perspectives. Some people see it as something that's been lost, even though it's very sacred to the community. Other people see it as a loss, but at the same time, it's important to move on from it. So, I think it was a cultural icon, and that to cover something like that up is very sad and wrong. But I think there's a lot of artists that you should be supporting. Not just me, because I mean I've gotten a lot of support from the Pilsen Alliance, but there's a lot of Pilsen natives that deserve the support because they're building community through the work they're doing out in the streets and creating their own gallery spaces as well.
Yeah.
And
so you're gonna be having an event this Saturday, and so if you would like to know more about this artist and his work, you can go to the Pilsen Alliance page, and the details are there, where you can find information about his event, where he's going to be showing some of his art. Also, Pilsen Alliance is doing a lot of work of housing. So we would like to invite everybody to come to this event that we're going to be having on September 7th. And it's basically we're gonna be talking about rent stabilization and affordability. For Pilsen, we're gonna have speakers. We're gonna have different organizations. If you need help in if you're being evicted, we're gonna have some information. We're gonna have lawyers, and we're gonna be talking about leave the ban. So thank you, Hernan, for being here with me today. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And hopefully we'll see you at the forum on September 7th. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.